One of the coolest parts about being a voice actor who works from their in-home studio is how many different kinds of people I get to meet from all over the world. Like, I've worked with e-learning companies in Taiwan. I've worked with nomadic authors who bounce around from continent to continent. I've worked with little production companies out of New Jersey. I've worked with animators in Colorado. I've worked with ad agencies in Greece. And once I worked with some indie VR devs who enjoyed working with me so much, they invited me to come live with them in their Cyberpunk commune in New York. These developers were all living in this enormous loft that looked like something out of every cyberpunk show and movie I've ever seen, at least from what I could tell based on what I was seeing during our directed sessions. Everything was neon pink and purple and blue, and everyone looked the part. They had hair colors that were out of a bottle, they had piercings, black clothes with all the straps, and they all had AR glasses that I don't even think are on the market yet. They all told me they worked in tech, and it seemed like they had a ton of money. They paid me really well, and everyone was really good looking. They took care of the invoices I sent them immediately after each directed session. Everyone seemed very kind, considerate, thoughtful, well-spoken, and the biggest green flag for me was that everything in that home seemed immaculate. I don't know if I've ever shared this with y'all, but I love nothing more than an impeccably clean and tidy house. There is nothing that makes me happier than a sterile environment, and most of my day working at home is trying to ignore the layer of dust that's on my baseboards because I haven't gotten around to it yet because there just aren't enough hours in the day. Anyway, when they first asked me if I wanted to live with them, my husband had passed away fairly recently. I was isolating in the place where his life ended because it happened just a few months before March 2020. I spent the year in and out of the hospital with a severe stomach infection, and honestly, I was struggling to get by on my own because of living in expensive San Diego. So when they asked me to move in, it seemed like a dream scenario. It was a really bougie loft with very affordable rent. And as I'm still living in very expensive San Diego, it's been tempting to just go join an instant community of people who seem to be very much on the same page as me and just kind of like have their lives together without being pretentious tool bags. Now, I have recently talked about how I was raised in what might be considered a cult, and consequently, from that and other life experiences, I've become very cautious when it comes to doing anything with groups, whether it's business or personal. And while I would love to say that once I got out of whatever weird family dynamic and community I lived in for about the first 26 years of my life, that I'd never got involved in some kind of weird group dynamic again, and I went on to be totally normal and well-adjusted, and I was completely immune from a second, third, fourth, or fifth bamboozling, that unfortunately was not the case. I've since learned that people who come from situations like the one I was in are kind of susceptible to fall back into that kind of life again. Whether it's in the form of religious communities, a controlling relationship dynamic, a support group, a business, or really just any kind of organization. Consequently, I've been extremely cautious about joining or being a part of any kind of group, and I'm more cautious than I've ever been when it comes to trusting or getting close to people in general. Like now, if it seems like any kind of collective doesn't have an easy exit strategy, and if there's any kind of significant commitment, at this point, I just won't be a part of it. There's a certain level of dedication and commitment that is now reserved for my children and my found family alone, and even then, the Chihuahua is on thin ice right now. I'm just joking, I would lay down my life, for this dog that looks like a Jim Henson creation. So, am I gonna pack everything up in my Corolla and make the 2,759-mile drive from San Diego, California to New York? I don't think so. We wrapped production on this project back in 2021, and I haven't heard anything from the people I was working with since. And when I tried to get in touch with them, nobody replied. Everyone's personal socials and the game's socials were gone. The website was gone. The Discord server was gone. It's like it never happened. I went back to check my bank's transfer statements just to reassure myself that it had really all happened, and this wasn't just some incredibly vivid fever dream I convinced myself of during 2020 when I was isolating by myself for like a year. I really have no idea what happened, and I try not to imagine the worst. But whatever did happen to them, to be honest, the idea of living in a high-tech collective with like-minded people was definitely an attractive offer. And if I'm being real, it's still a pretty attractive offer. I've been obsessed with vaporwave, synth, and neon for the past few years, especially anything pink and purple. It's just so pretty. And I get how saying something like that sounds really weird, and not just because it makes me sound like a moth attracted to bright lights. Because let's be real. Why would anyone want to live in a world like this? Why would anyone be drawn to a dystopian world with societal collapse and decay? Why would someone want to trade their current life for a post-industrial wasteland? The thing is, a lot of people in America already see life as pretty dystopian. It's actually one of the reasons I think some movies and shows that I would classify as light or diet cyberpunk kind of fell off for a lot of people. Specifically the show Black Mirror. Black Mirror was fun to watch because it was very what if. At one point, we were at a crossroads when it came to how we were going to handle technology, and it was spooky and kind of thrilling to see what the future could look like if we made the wrong choices. Today, a lot of episodes of Black Mirror look pretty close to reality. And that's less spooky and more just horrifying, because it does seem that we did indeed make the wrong choices when it comes to how we handle rapidly advancing technology. And that might not even be the worst part. In many of the Black Mirror episodes, there's something that makes the dystopia worth it. There are pretty aesthetics, or a guarantee of a place to sleep, and a full belly at the end of the day. In our own reality, we have a lot of that technology, but none of the guarantees. And yes, many things have absolutely gotten better for a lot of Americans these past few decades. But a lot of things have also gotten worse, and other things are just plain eroding. Unless you're extremely lucky, there's a very good chance you're stressed out about affording or even getting access to healthcare. There's a good chance your wages haven't kept up with inflation, so simply surviving is expensive. There's a good chance there's little to no money left over at the end of the month for entertainment. And it seems impossible to change the way things are because everything is happening on such a massive scale with so much oppressive technology. In a lot of the movies and shows set in the cyberpunk genre, there's this idea that even though everything is dystopian, there's some kind of accessible relief to be found. Whether that's through virtual reality, fashion, neon lights, holographic billboards, or body modification. When you take into consideration how many people in the current American population live in something that can be described as industrial urban sprawl without any third spaces, a cyberpunk dystopia can start to seem kind of preferable. Something I've seen a lot of people talking about for the past few weeks is how we actually aren't experiencing a cyberpunk dystopia, but a bubblegum dystopia. As far as I can tell, the phrase comes from an interview with David Warren on a Terry Gilliam fan site, in which he explains that when a friend of his came to a screening of the movie The Zero Theorem, he described it as a bubblegum dystopia, which Warren thinks stuck because the film contains pinks, oranges, and candy apple colors. And late last month, the phrase entered the public zeitgeist when author Stephen Notham posted a TikTok explaining that a bubblegum dystopia is a dystopian future that is typically ruled by a totalitarian corporate entity, and this entity makes the world vibrant and convenient, but hollow. The citizens are reduced to consumers as their primary identity, and in a bubblegum dystopia, all the citizens of this world believe that they are living in the best era of humanity. When I heard that explanation, it seemed to be just such an accurate description of this constant and insatiable consumption we're seeing that provides no actual nourishment, just like bubblegum. And the juxtaposition of the bright and fun colors alongside very visible decay, constant corporate surveillance, exploitation, and growing disillusionment is, in my opinion, somehow actually more horrifying than what we've seen depicted in the cyberpunk genre. And I think that's because in a bubblegum dystopia, everyone pretends to be happy, because to let their cheery masks slip would be offensive. With all of this incredible technology at your fingertips, you'd be considered ungrateful if you were depressed. Many people would tell you you have first world problems the moment you mention being unhappy, because there are some people who don't have access to running water or are living in war zones. Almost every American owns smartphones and has video games, so if they complain about anything, they must be unappreciative, spoiled, lazy brats. And not brat in like the good way. The powers that be also don't want us to stop mindlessly consuming because the moment we stop, we'll realize how unsatiated we are and how truly empty our lives might be. And that is what is so scary about a bubblegum dystopia. In Cyberpunk, there's a deep understanding of the reality everyone is living in, and there's a desire to rebel against it. But with a bubblegum dystopia, there's not only acceptance of the status quo, there's also no desire to break away from it. I think that's why the aesthetic or genre is so popular right now. It's very much a reflection of how many Americans are experiencing life. It actually reminds me of something called hypernormalisation. In 2016, British filmmaker Adam Curtis released a BBC documentary of the same name, which posits that, since the 70s, we've been living in an established fake world created by and for corporations. But to the best of my knowledge, the term hypernormalization was actually coined by professor of anthropology Alexei Yurchak in his 2006 book, Everything Was Forever Until It Was No More, The Last Soviet Generation. In the book, Yurchak described when the Soviet Union was failing, everyone knew it was failing. but nobody did anything about it. Both citizens and politicians just kept pretending everything was fine, and the fakeness was eventually accepted as reality. And I've heard a lot of people mention recently how it seems like we're just expected to ignore the chaos of not only what's going on in our own country, but also what's going on globally. We're supposed to send emails about how we're so excited to market this campaign, while the world is falling apart. I've heard so many people say it feels like it's nearly impossible to keep blinders on when we're all so very aware of what's happening on around us. A fair percentage of Americans are living in worse situations than the generations before them, and they're watching their quality of life dissolve in real time. And it's depressing because I think many of us lived during this point in history where we were personally told that as long as we worked hard, we could own a home, go on a vacation or two every summer, have enough time and discretionary income throughout the week to enjoy hobbies, and then retire around the age of 60. That was the expectation for so many people, and now we're coming to realize it's not going to happen for a lot of us. And this realization is happening while we're continuously being told to smile, practice gratitude, stream this show, play that game, and just make do with less. And we do it because the alternative would be to lose whatever it is that we do have. We're trapped, and we find comfort in the pretty colors of the bubblegum world around us. Now, cyberpunk is similar to a bubblegum dystopia in its portrayal of low life with high tech, but in many ways, it's a very stark contrast. The genre has been around since at least the 1960s with varying peaks of popularity, but it's always had a very steady fan base, and has once again become more mainstream in the past few years. What I find particularly telling about cyberpunk is that it seems to have been created as a direct reaction to the optimistic utopian world of the future that the 1940s and 1950s predicted would come about via advances in technology. In cyberpunk, we see a future where these advancements weren't used for the good of all humanity. They're used to increase the wealth of a very, very small percentage of people. Cyberpunk is nihilistic and heavily borrows elements from film noir, often taking place in underground tech-heavy societies or in cyberspace, blurring the lines of what's real and what isn't. But I think what really separates the genres, besides the body modification and transhumanism, is how blatant the call to action is in cyberpunk, particularly with a focus on the marginalized. And one of the best depictions I've seen in recent years would have to be Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Anime has always been in the forefront of the cyberpunk genre, so it seems obvious that the medium would release yet another banger. But this one hit kinda different. Edgerunners takes place in the year 2076 in what is the roughest part of Night City, California, which is a typical cyberpunk dystopia, complete with all the hallmarks of the genre: corruption, cybernetic implants, megacorporations, violence, and addiction. Our protagonist is David Martinez, who, after his mother is murdered in a drive-by shooting, becomes a high-tech mercenary or an edgerunner in the black market. Before joining and falling in love with another edgerunner named Lucy, David came across a powerful piece of cyberware tech that slows down time for whoever is using it, but not without the consequence of experiencing something called cyberpsychosis, an incurable mental illness that resulted in the death of its last wearer, something David was aware of but chose to ignore, believing he was special, just like his mother told him before she died. And David was special. He didn't develop cyberpsychosis despite using the tech heavily for many years, until one day he did. After Lucy and their friends are kidnapped, David eventually sacrifices everything to save the woman he loves. She then goes to visit the moon, a long-time dream she had shared with David. But we get the feeling that there's little satisfaction in the achievement after losing her partner and her friends. She quite literally stands on an empty moon, and we feel that hollowness. And every time I watch this scene, I can't help but remember how David's entire life had been spent living for the dreams of those around him. Like when he stands on top of the tower, he's thinking about showing his mom what he's accomplished. He's not thinking about what it is that he wanted. His entire arc is about searching for his own value that he never really seems to find. He continues to descend into madness until it kills him, something that he simply accepts because he only lives for the sake of others and never for himself, which is the corporate end-stage capitalist dream. And that's why the ending can feel so incredibly tragic and empty. Well, that's one way to look at it anyway. Another way to look at it is that David realized the choices he made, and despite everything, he chose to keep fighting until the end. He knew that he was going to die. He knew everything was hopeless, and yet he kept fighting. And in that last scene, personally, I think we get the sense that Lucy's gonna keep fighting too. Of course, not everyone picks up on this kind of stuff. It's similar to how some people will ask, when did Rage Against the Machine get political? Or why is the boys suddenly all woke? But I think a lot of fans are in fact specifically here for the punk part of cyberpunk. That's because punk at its core is about rebelling against the people in power and not playing by their game. It's about doing what's right and not just falling in line because someone else is stronger. It's about accepting the title of criminal because that's what you'll be called when you go against the corporate world. Punk is about fighting against an oppressively powerful hierarchy. It's about still trying to topple the system even though you know you're probably going to fail. Because at the end of the day, trying means you still have your autonomy, and that is what makes us truly human. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to TawnyVoice.com members whose donations make videos like this possible. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with your friends, and I'll see you next time.